My wife moaned for another man in the home we built together, and I smiled. Not out of forgiveness, not out of peace. It was the kind of smile that forms when your soul fractures beyond repair. My name is Jason. Clara and I had been married for 14 years. We met in college, two broken souls who somehow made each other whole. I believed we'd beaten the odds, built a real family, carved out a life filled with laughter, growth, and love. I had no reason to doubt her. No warning. That day, I left work early with the best surprise, a promotion and the necklace she'd been eyeing for months. I entered through the back door, hoping to see her smile. Instead, I found wine glasses, cigarette smoke, and silence too heavy to ignore. Then came the laughter. Then the voice that wasn't mine. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood there, smiling, while everything I believed about love died quietly inside me. I still remember the first time I saw Clara. It was freshman year, and I was the quiet kid sitting alone in the back corner of a packed lecture hall. She was late, out of breath, and somehow managed to drop every book in her bag as she tried to squeeze past me. She laughed at herself with such ease, and when she turned to apologize, her smile felt like sunlight on a life that had known too much shadow. We became friends almost instantly. Clara never treated me like the broken boy I was. She just saw me. My childhood had been rough, a father who drank too much and loved too little, a mother who left before I turned 10. I grew up learning how to survive, but never how to trust or feel safe. Clara changed all that. She gave me the kind of affection that didn't ask for anything in return. I fell for her long before I admitted it. By senior year, we were inseparable. She believed in me, even when I couldn't believe in myself. After graduation, we didn't wait long to get married. It wasn't a grand wedding, just a small ceremony at the park where we first kissed. But it felt perfect. It felt like home. We built our life from scratch. Small apartment, tight budgets, shared dreams. I worked long hours trying to provide, and she supported us through nursing school. When our first son, Max, was born, I cried harder than he did. 2 years later came Emma, and I thought, this is it. This is the happiness I never thought I'd deserve. Clara was everything I thought a wife should be. Supportive, funny, passionate. She knew how to calm me when I spiraled and how to celebrate my every small win like it was a triumph. I'd never stopped trying to earn her love, not because she made me feel like I had to, but because I wanted to. Looking back now, I wonder if I loved her too much. Or maybe I just loved blindly, with the kind of hope only a broken man clings to when he finally finds light. We were partners in every sense. Through sickness, financial strain, and sleepless nights with crying babies, we held each other up. We fought, of course. What couple doesn't? But even our arguments felt safe. They ended with apologies, with understanding, with a renewed promise to keep choosing each other. On our 10th anniversary, I wrote Clara a letter. I didn't buy jewelry or plan a getaway, we couldn't afford it. But I poured my heart onto paper. I thanked her for saving me, for believing in me, for making our home a sanctuary. She cried when she read it, and I remember thinking, she still loves me the way I love her. I never once doubted that. I wasn't perfect. I missed date nights because of work. I forgot to say the right things sometimes. But I never stopped loving her. I made her coffee every morning, kissed her goodnight no matter how tired I was, and always made sure she knew how beautiful she was, even on her worst days. She was the first person I called when I got the job promotion, the first hand I wanted to hold when life got scary. I looked at Clara and saw my whole life, past, present, and future, in her eyes. She was my anchor, my reason. I thought we were growing old together, that someday we'd be the couple holding hands at the grocery store in our 70s, teasing each other and telling strangers about the day we met in that lecture hall. I truly believed we were unbreakable. But love, at least the kind I gave, wasn't enough. I didn't just love Clara. I built my world around her. Every major decision, every plan, every hope was shaped with her in mind. I gave everything, not because I had to, but because I wanted her to always feel safe, valued, and adored. She was the best part of me, and I would have walked through fire if it meant keeping her warm. That's what makes all of this so unbearable now. Because when you build your world around someone and they choose to burn it down, you don't just lose them, you lose yourself. It didn't happen all at once. That's what made it so easy to ignore at first. Clara started coming home later than usual. At first she blamed work, back-to-back shifts, charting, new patients. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? She was a nurse, and her job had always been demanding. But then it became more than just a schedule. It became an absence. She stopped asking how my day was. She used to text me during lunch, send silly emojis or memes that made me laugh in the middle of meetings. Now, hours would go by with nothing. I'd come home and find her scrolling her phone in the kitchen, quickly locking the screen when I entered. I never asked. I didn't want to seem controlling. She started sleeping earlier, or at least pretending to. I'd crawl into bed and she'd already be turned away, claiming exhaustion. The kisses became pecks, the hugs became side glances. One night, I leaned in to touch him and she flinched. Just slightly. Just enough to notice. Then there was the perfume. Clara always wore something soft and floral, something I could recognize in a crowd. But this was new. Sharp, musky, unfamiliar. I mentioned it once, jokingly. She brushed it off, said it was a sample from a coworker. I let it go. I let a lot of things go. There were weekends when she needed space or wanted time to herself. She started running errands alone, going for late evening walks, saying she needed air. I offered to join her. She always said no. And her eyes. God, her eyes. Clara used to look at me like I was the only man in the room. Now, she couldn't meet my gaze for more than a few seconds. At dinner, the silence stretched longer. Our kids would fill the space with chatter, and Claire would smile, but it never reached her eyes. I tried asking if she was okay, if she was overwhelmed, if I'd done something wrong. Every time she'd reassure me, just tired, work's been rough, you're overthinking it. Maybe I was. So I doubled down. I cleaned more. Took the kids out so she could rest. Bought her flowers on random Tuesdays. Booked a couple's massage. But she never followed through on it. I kept telling myself this was a rough patch. That after 14 years, lulls were normal. But I wasn't sleeping. I lay awake wondering when we'd last laughed together. When was the last time she touched me without obligation? When had I stopped being enough? And yet, I never confronted her, not really. I told myself she just needed time, that work was draining her, that maybe I wasn't doing enough. I made excuses. For her, for me, for the growing emptiness between us. Because admitting the truth would mean admitting that something sacred was already breaking. And I wasn't ready to see it shattered. They were small lies, too. Things that didn't quite add up. A receipt in her purse from a restaurant we never visited. A necklace I'd never seen before was tucked into her drawer. She said it was a gift from a coworker, a group birthday present. I smiled and nodded. I wanted to believe her. I needed to. Some nights, I'd hear her whispering on the phone in the bathroom with the faucet running. Once, I knocked and asked if everything was okay. Her voice shot back sharply and defensively. "Can't I have 5 minutes to myself?" She never used to speak to me like that. I started blaming myself. Maybe I wasn't attentive enough. Maybe I'd grown boring, predictable. I trimmed my beard, bought new shirts, and even picked up cooking just to surprise her. Clara would thank me with a distracted kiss or a tired smile, then disappear into another room. Even the kids noticed. Max asked me one night, "Is Mom mad at us?" That question cracked something in me. I told him no, that she was just tired. But deep down, I wondered if that was true. What hurt most wasn't the absence of affection, it was the absence of effort. The way she stopped trying to connect, as if I'd already been dismissed in her heart, but she hadn't told me yet. I used to be her safe space. Now I felt like a roommate she was avoiding. Still, I told myself this wasn't the end, that marriages had seasons, that love bends before it breaks. But I was wrong. What I thought were temporary distances were in truth the earliest signs of abandonment, and I was the fool, too scared to name it. The weekend was supposed to be a reset, a chance for us to breathe, to reconnect without the chaos of parenting. I had asked my brother to take Max and Emma for a few days, just so Clara and I could have time to ourselves. She agreed, though her enthusiasm felt measured. Still, I was hopeful. The day after they left, I got the call. After years of grinding, missed birthdays, and late-night reports, I had finally been promoted. It wasn't just a raise. It was recognition. Proof that I was building something solid, not just for myself, but for us. I was thrilled. I couldn't wait to tell Clara. I stopped by the mall on my way home and bought her the necklace she'd been admiring for months. A delicate silver chain with a sapphire teardrop. She never asked for much, but I remembered the way her eyes lingered on it during a window shopping trip. This would make her smile. This would remind us of who we were. To make the surprise better, I texted her saying I'd be home late. "Big project, don't wait up," I wrote. I pulled into our driveway just after 5. The house looked calm, no lights on, no movement in the windows. I went around the back, our little ritual from years ago when I wanted to surprise her with takeout or flowers. This time, it was something more. I eased the door open, careful not to make a sound. The air smelled faintly of wine and something else. Smoke? I walked into the kitchen and froze. 2 wine glasses are on the counter, one half empty, and next to them, a pack of cigarettes. Clara didn't smoke. She hated it, always did. I stood there for a long minute, the box in my hand suddenly feeling heavier. My heart started pounding, not from excitement anymore, but something darker. Dread. I moved toward the stairs, footsteps quiet against the wood. As I climbed, I heard water running, the shower, and then laughter. Not hers alone. A man's voice, deep, unfamiliar, teasing. Stopped outside our bedroom door, the one we'd painted together, the one with tiny chips on the handle from when Max used to slam it shut during hide and seek. They were talking, laughing, and then the talking stopped. What came next made my stomach turn. Moans. Hers. His. The sound of skin against skin. The kind of rhythm you can't misinterpret. My world narrowed to that moment, that door, that betrayal seeping through the cracks like poison. I didn't open it. I didn't knock. I couldn't. I just stood there, gift in hand, while the person I loved most became a stranger on the other side. I don't remember leaving the house. 1 minute I was frozen in the hallway, the next I was behind the wheel, driving with no direction. The necklace was still in my lap, the ribbon undone. I turned up the music, not to drown the sounds I'd heard, but to silence the thoughts that were already screaming. Thoughts like, what did I do wrong? And how long has this been going on? And worst of all, was any of it ever real? She called me at 11:07 p.m. I saw her name flash across the screen and felt nothing. Then she texted, "Where are you? Are you okay? Please call me." I didn't reply. I couldn't. Instead, I kept driving, away from the house, away from the life I thought I knew. And in that endless stretch of dark highway, one truth began to sink in. Everything had changed. I don't know how long I drove. Minutes? Hours? Time stopped meaning anything. At every red light, I thought about turning back, barging in, screaming, demanding answers. But some part of me knew. I didn't want the details. I didn't want to hear her excuses, or worse, her silence. I pulled into an empty parking lot behind a closed gas station and just sat there, engine running, hands gripping the wheel so tight they ached. My whole body felt foreign, like it belonged to someone else. Someone who hadn't just had his entire world set on fire. I kept replaying it, the laughter. The water is running, the soft creak of our mattress, the way her voice changed with him. I hated myself for not stopping it, for not screaming, for not smashing down that door. But what would that have changed? The betrayal had already happened, and knowing the full scene would only deepen the wound, I chose silence. I chose to disappear. For the first time in 14 years, I didn't want to go home. That thought, that single thought, broke me in a way nothing else could. Home had always been Clara, her voice, her scent, her arms around our children, and now, I couldn't even stand to hear her name. That was the moment I realized, this wasn't just a mistake she made. This was the end of the life I thought we were living. I thought about the kids, about how I would ever explain this to Max and Emma. How do you tell your children that the person you loved most no longer feels like family, that the home they knew was a lie, or at least no longer whole? I thought about calling my brother, about driving straight to his house and collapsing on his couch, but I couldn't face anyone. Not yet, not when the pain was this raw, this loud. Instead, I sat in that car, letting the weight of it all crush me. And when the tears finally came, they weren't loud. They were quiet, stubborn streams that refused to stop, because some part of me still hoped this wasn't real, that I'd wake up, that I'd walk into our kitchen tomorrow morning and find her making coffee, barefoot and humming. But deep down, I knew better. That version of my life had ended the moment I heard her laugh with him upstairs. The motel smelled like bleach and loneliness. I didn't even bother turning on the lights. I dropped under the bed, face down, still wearing the same clothes I'd put on that morning when I thought the day would end with celebration. My chest felt like it was caving in and my mind wouldn't stop spinning. Everything, her laughter, the moans, the image of our bedroom door, looped like a sick movie I couldn't pause. My phone buzzed again. Clara. I watched the screen light up from across the room and felt nothing. Or maybe too much. I couldn't answer her. I couldn't hear her voice, because if I did, I was afraid I'd forgive her out of habit, out of weakness, out of love. Instead, I lay in the dark, tracing every moment that led us here. Our first kiss was in the library, the way she held my hand during my mother's funeral, the night we danced barefoot in the kitchen after putting the kids to bed. All of it now felt like shards of glass underfoot, beautiful but painful to remember. I cried until my throat was raw, until my ribs ached, and even then, it didn't feel like enough. Like I hadn't earned the right to break because maybe, just maybe, I should have seen it coming. I should have asked more questions, should have pushed when she pulled away. It should have been better. The guilt was louder than the grief. Sometime past midnight, I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw her. Not the Clara I married, but the one from hours ago in the arms of someone else. I wondered if she looked at him the way she once looked at me, if he knew he was destroying a family, if he even cared. I thought about the kids, Max's goofy laugh, Emma's bedtime stories. I imagined what this would do to them, how they'd look at me when I told them Mom and Dad weren't okay, that our family, our safe little world, had cracks. We couldn't hide anymore. That broke me more than anything else. I got up, paced the room, then sat back down. I did that for hours, like my body couldn't decide whether to collapse or run. I felt like I was floating above my own life, watching it crumble in real time with no power to stop it. Around 3 a.m., I stared at myself in the bathroom mirror. My eyes were swollen, my jaw clenched, shoulders sagging under a weight I didn't know how to carry. I didn't recognize the man looking back. He looked tired, hollow, like someone who'd just lost everything that mattered. I splashed water on my face, breathed, tried to ground myself. But the truth kept pounding in my chest. Clara cheated on me. And I still loved her. I hated that part the most. The night stretched on like a punishment. The silence screamed louder than any words ever could. I wasn't sure what hurt more, the betrayal or the loss of what we used to be, what we could have been. For a fleeting second, I wondered if it would just be easier to disappear, to keep driving, to not come back. But then Max's face flashed in my mind, then Emma's. No, I couldn't do that to them. But I didn't know how to be strong either, not yet, not when everything inside me had collapsed. So I stayed in that room, waiting, breathing, breaking, hoping the sunrise might bring even a flicker of clarity. Or at the very least, the strength to stand again. I kept asking myself the same questions over and over. Was it my fault? Was I not enough? Had I missed the signs because I didn't want to believe she was capable of hurting me like this? Even worse, had she fallen out of love with me long before that night? Those thoughts clawed at me, refusing to let go. I imagined scenarios, rewrote conversations, and tried to pinpoint the exact moment we started drifting. But there was no single moment, just 1,000 quiet choices, 1,000 small silences that piled up until they swallowed us whole. I considered texting her, not to yell, not to beg, just to ask, why? But I didn't, because deep down I feared her answer more than the silence. Instead, I wrote the question in my head 100 different ways. I scrolled through our old messages, searching for some sign, anything to explain how we went from soulmates to strangers. Every I love you from her felt like a lie now, no matter how sincere it once seemed. I looked out the motel window. The parking lot was empty, bathed in the dull orange of a flickering street lamp, and in that stillness I felt more alone than I ever had in my life. I thought I knew heartbreak. I'd lost people before, been abandoned, but this was different. This was betrayal, by the one person I thought would never walk away. And that kind of pain, it doesn't shout, it whispers, constantly, relentlessly, until you can't hear anything else. The morning I finally opened the motel curtains, the world looked different. It wasn't brighter, it wasn't kinder, but it was still there. And for the first time in days, I let the sun hit my face without flinching. I hadn't eaten much, hadn't showered in 2 days, but something inside me shifted. I was still broken, but I was done pretending the pieces might fall back into place on their own. I picked up my phone and made 2 calls. The first was to a divorce attorney. The second was to my brother. No dramatic confrontation, no final goodbye, just a decision. I wasn't going to live in a lie any longer. Clara hadn't confessed, she hadn't apologized, but I didn't need her to anymore. I had all the clarity I was ever going to get. My brother met me at a diner near his place. He didn't ask many questions, just hugged me, slid a coffee across the table and listened. I told him everything, the wine glasses, the laughter, the silence. Saying it out loud made it real, and real was painful. But it was also powerful. That same afternoon I filed for legal separation and started looking into custody. I wasn't going to punish Clara, but I wasn't going to lose my kids either. The first few days back were hard. My apartment was quiet, foreign, and sterile. I bought a second-hand couch, a cheap coffee maker, and a few toys to make the space feel like something resembling a home. Every time I looked at the empty walls, I had to fight the urge to text Clara, to ask if she was sorry, to ask if she missed us. But I didn't. Instead, I ran. Literally. I started jogging every morning, not far, just around the block. At first it felt pointless, but the burn in my lungs, the pounding of my feet reminded me I was still here, still alive. I downloaded audiobooks, biographies, podcasts, anything to fill the silence with something other than grief. One day I ran into Aaron, an old college friend I hadn't seen in years. He'd been through a rough divorce too. We got coffee, then lunch, then started meeting every weekend. He didn't give advice unless I asked. Mostly he just reminded me that I was still allowed to want things. Peace, joy, a future. He said something that stuck with me. Your story isn't over just because someone burned a chapter. That night, I wrote a list of things I used to love. Sketching, Sunday hikes, and making pancakes with the kids. I taped it to my fridge. I started crossing things off. I also started therapy. At first, I hated every second. I didn't want to talk about my childhood again. Didn't want to be the sad, betrayed guy crying in someone's office. But slowly, week by week, the weight got lighter. I stopped blaming myself for Clara's choices. I stopped waiting for closure she'd never offer. I began building routines, waking up early, cooking dinner, reading bedtime stories over FaceTime when the kids weren't with me. I started showing up not for Clara, not for the version of our life that died, but for Max and Emma, for me. Recovery wasn't linear. There were setbacks. Nights when the loneliness clawed at my throat, days when I saw families in parks and had to leave before the ache got too loud. But each time I got back up, I realized something important. I was healing. Not fast, not cleanly, but fully. And for the first time, I believed I might actually be okay again. The real shift came one afternoon when I picked up the kids for the weekend. Max ran straight into my arms like nothing had changed. Emma showed me a drawing she made at school. It was of our old house, but in the corner, she'd drawn 2 homes with a heart in between. "See, Daddy?" she said. "Now we have 2 places to love." I nearly broke down in front of her, but instead I hugged her tighter and whispered, "Yeah, sweetheart, 2 places to love." That night, we made pancakes for dinner, just like we used to. I let them pour too much syrup and stay up too late watching cartoons, and for a few hours, the pain didn't win. Love did. Not the romantic kind, but the kind that endures. In those quiet, sticky-fingered moments, I started to believe again. Not in Clara, not in marriage, but in the possibility of joy after devastation. I realized healing wasn't about forgetting her betrayal. It was about remembering who I was before it and choosing to become even more than that after. And I wasn't doing it alone. I had my kids, my brother, my friends, myself. And that was enough to begin again. 6 months later, the man in the mirror looked nothing like the one who had stumbled into that motel room, with tear-streaked cheeks and a shattered soul. My jaw was sharper. My eyes are steadier. There was strength in my posture, not arrogance, but a quiet confidence that came from surviving the worst and standing up anyway. I wore a tailored navy suit that morning, not to impress, but to remind myself I belonged in that courtroom just as much as she did. Clara arrived late. She looked surprised to see me, composed, calm, as if she'd expected me to crawl in, broken and begging. But I didn't flinch, not when her lawyer spoke, not when she tried to paint our marriage as strained long before the affair. I had facts, dates, screenshots, the hotel receipts, messages. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shame her. I let the truth speak for itself. And it did. When the judge asked about custody, Clara tried to argue that the children were closer to her, that she had always been the primary caregiver. But I had prepared. I showed how involved I'd been from the beginning. School meetings, bedtime routines, birthday parties, even the chore chart we'd made together. I had statements from teachers. A schedule showing how I'd split my time between work and home. The judge awarded me primary custody. Clara's face fell, not with rage but something worse, regret. She didn't fight it. She couldn't. Because deep down, I think she knew she'd lost more than just a court case. She'd lost me. I didn't gloat. I didn't even look at her when we left the courtroom. I just shook my lawyer's hand, thanked the judge, and walked out with my kids waiting in the hallway. That weekend we moved. Not just to a new house, but a new city. A smaller town with better schools, friendlier neighbors, and parks where Max and Emma could ride their bikes without worry. I found a job that paid less but gave me more time. More mornings making breakfast. More nights helping with homework. We created new routines. Saturday morning pancakes. Sunday, library visits. Movie nights with popcorn and blanket forts. Our home wasn't perfect, but it was ours. And it was honest. Clara called once. Just once. She didn't apologize. Not directly. She just said, "You seem good." I said, "I am." Then I hung up. There was no venom, no lingering pain, just a quiet understanding that some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. I don't hate her, but I don't forgive her either. Forgiveness implies I owe her peace. I don't. I owe that to myself, and to my kids. One night, Emma asked me, "Do you still love Mommy?" I paused, then said, "I love who she used to be, and I love that she helped bring you into my life, but love doesn't always mean staying." She nodded. "I'm glad you stayed." "Me too, kid, me too." Because walking away from what hurt me wasn't weakness. It was the strongest thing I've ever done. In the new town, people didn't know my story. I was just Mr. Taylor, the dad who packed extra snacks for field trips, who volunteered for the school carnival, who always cheered the loudest at soccer games. And that anonymity, being known for who I was now, not what I'd survived, felt like freedom. I reconnected with myself in ways I didn't expect. I started sketching again, something I hadn't done since college. My hands remembered the motions, the flow of charcoal on paper. It became therapy, the way I processed emotions words couldn't touch. I also started coaching Max's Little League team. At first, I thought I was doing it for him, but somewhere between teaching grounders and high-fiving wins, I realized I was healing too, watching him grow, watching both of them thrive. It reminded me that I hadn't failed as a father. I had stepped up. I met new people. Some became friends. One, eventually, became something more. It was slow, intentional. I wasn't looking to fill a void. I just wanted to laugh again, to feel seen, not as someone's husband or someone's ex, but just as me. And for the first time in a long time, I liked who that was. Clara drifted to the background of my life, a name in shared documents, a monthly exchange of schedules. She wasn't the villain anymore, just a chapter I'd turned the page on. People often ask if I'd do it all differently, if I regret loving her the way I did. I don't. Because from that love came Max and Emma. And from that heartbreak came the man I am now, stronger, clearer, and finally, whole. One evening, while tucking Emma into bed, she whispered, "You're happy now, aren't you?" And smiled and said, "I think I'm learning how to be." She nodded, satisfied. "You're doing great, Daddy." That was the moment I knew I didn't just survive Clara's betrayal, I transcended it. I didn't just rebuild my life, I redesigned it from the ground up. And I did it not by getting revenge, but by reclaiming my worth. With grace, with strength, and most importantly with love, that never needed to be betrayed to prove it was real. Clara thought she'd be fine. At first, she seemed unbothered, confident even. She posted pictures of weekend getaways, wine nights, and yoga mornings. The man she'd chosen over our marriage, Daniel, smiled beside her like he belonged. But facades crack quickly when built on betrayal. 2 months after the custody ruling, Daniel was gone. No warning, just a message saying he wasn't ready for all this. Clara stopped posting after that. She tried to find her footing again, applied for better jobs, moved into a smaller apartment, reached out to old friends, many of whom had drifted, unsure of how to support someone who had imploded her own life. Her shifts at the hospital were cut, budget changes, a new supervisor. Nothing personal, they said. She emailed me once. The subject line was simple, "I'm sorry." I didn't open it. Not because I hated her, but because I didn't owe her anything anymore. Not my time, not my energy, and certainly not my forgiveness. She asked to meet, just to talk, she wrote, just to explain. I declined. I didn't need explanations. The choices she made spoke loudly enough. Besides, I was busy raising 2 kids, rebuilding a life, and learning how to smile without effort again. Occasionally, we'd cross paths at school events or birthday parties. She always stood a little off to the side, like a guest in a life she once belonged to. Emma would run into my arms. Max would tug my sleeve to show me his project, and Clara would just watch. That was the hardest part for her, I think, not the job loss, not the failed romance, but the realization that she was no longer the center of our world, that the man who once worshipped her now saw her as a footnote. She once had unconditional love, and now all she had was regret. I heard from a mutual friend that she started therapy, that she was trying to work on herself. I hope she is, I truly do. But whatever healing she finds won't include me. Because some bridges don't burn in fire, they crumble in silence. And by the time Clara realized she wanted to go back, the road no longer existed. One evening, Clara showed up at one of Max's baseball games. She stood behind the fence, sunglasses on, arms crossed tightly across her chest. I noticed her, but didn't acknowledge her. I was too busy cheering, high-fiving Max after a good play, and passing snacks to Emma. After the game, Clara tried to say hello. I nodded politely, kept walking. Later, a friend told me she sat in her car for over an hour after we left. The truth is, Clara had imagined I'd be the one who couldn't move on, that I'd always orbit around her, hoping for scraps of attention. She never expected that I'd grow without her, that I'd become more without her, that I'd learn to live without needing her validation. She underestimated my pain, and she definitely underestimated my strength. I heard she started taking evening walks alone. She deleted all her old photos from social media. Her eyes looked tired, even when she smiled. People say she's finding herself. But all I see is someone trying to rewind time and learning the hard way that some mistakes are irreversible. Our kids still see her, they love her, and I would never change that. But even they sense the shift. They talk about Mom's apartment like it's a stop, not a home. Emma once whispered, "Mom gets sad when we leave." I nodded and said, "That happens when you miss what you had." I wasn't cruel, I wasn't vindictive. I just moved forward and didn't take her with me. Sometimes, the real punishment isn't revenge. It's watching someone become everything you once wanted, without you. I'm not the same man who walked into that house with a velvet box in his hand, full of hope and blind trust. That version of me died the moment I heard Clara's laugh echo through our bedroom walls. But from his ashes, someone stronger rose. I've learned that healing isn't about time, it's about choice. The choice to stop bleeding for someone who wouldn't have bandaged you. The choice to show up for your kids, even when you can barely show up for yourself. The choice to love again, starting with the person in the mirror. Today, I don't measure my worth by how loyal I was to someone who betrayed me. I measure it by how gently I hold my children's hands, by how fiercely I guard my peace, by how honestly I live my life. I've learned that love, real love, is not about sacrifice at the cost of self. It's about 2 whole people choosing each other every single day. Clara stopped choosing me, but I kept choosing her, until I chose myself instead. And that choice saved me. If you're reading this and you're hurting, I want you to know, you are not broken beyond repair. Your value isn't diminished by someone's inability to see it. You are allowed to start over. You are allowed to protect your heart, your future, and your joy. I thought I'd never smile again. I thought the betrayal would define me. But now, I smile freely, and the betrayal, it refined me. It taught me that strength isn't loud. Sometimes it's just getting out of bed. Sometimes it's holding back the text. Sometimes it's taking the long way home so you don't pass the house you once shared. And sometimes it's simply saying, I deserve better. I don't know what the future holds, but I know who I am. I'm a father. I'm a survivor. I'm someone who learned to let go of what he wanted, to make room for what he needed. And that, to me, is the truest kind of freedom. Looking back, I realized that we are often taught to fight for love, to endure, to forgive endlessly, but we are rarely taught to walk away with dignity, to accept that not all stories end the way we hoped, that sometimes the most courageous thing we can do is choose ourselves. The pain didn't make me bitter, it made me honest. I no longer see love as something to be earned through suffering. Love should never require us to shrink, to doubt, to sacrifice every part of who we are just to keep someone else warm. If someone asks me now what love means, I'll say this. Love is showing up, consistently, kindly, truthfully. Love is not begging to be chosen. And if you find yourself having to chase it, then maybe it's not love at all. I tell my kids this when they ask about relationships. I don't paint Clara as a villain. But I don't lie either. I tell them, love must come from both sides, that trust is sacred, that communication matters, that their feelings matter. As they nod, like they understand, and maybe, someday, they truly will. As for me, I live with more peace than I ever imagined possible. I wake up early, I drink coffee on the porch while the kids sleep in, I read books that challenge me, I laugh louder, I sleep more deeply. I've created a life that doesn't need anyone's approval to feel whole. And if love finds me again someday, it'll be a bonus, not a rescue. Because I'm already home.